Okay, so um, now that we got our app working, let's take a look at it again. You can see that I have that famous two-way data binding. When I type something here, it updates what's ever on the right-hand side, so that's cool. So now what I want to do is I've got this pattern here. You can see that here my code for Angular goes in my script tag. Then I have an ng controller. Then I've got an ng model. So the ng model is basically my data. And if we go to AngularJS and I just type ng model here, I get documentation for ng model. And basically here, this is what I want you to pay attention to, because like this is stuff that's always throwing me off. ng model is basically used for inputs, selects, text areas, or any kind of custom form control. So anytime you have data on a page, mainly you're going to be working with forms when you think about ng model. So my biggest stumbling block with ng model was I thought I could use it anywhere, but so if you don't use form elements for ng model, then you may run into some issues like where's my model, why isn't it actually updating? But let's go ahead and create. So we've got our pattern here. We've got ng controller controls any of the models and other divs inside this div here. And then of course outside here, I can, in my script tag, in my app.controller for first controller, I can also modify the variables here. So let's go ahead and try that out. So if I say scope.test is now equal to JavaScript LA, and I save my work, I can open this in a browser, and then you can see by default now it's JavaScript LA. And of course I can change the value, but at the beginning it's always JavaScript LA if I refresh. So that's really nice. So the controller allows me to change the value of the input in the script tag, while the input ng model here allows me to change on the fly with that double data binding. Okay, so let's see some more examples. So we also talked about having true or false values. So let's say I had an input type checkbox, right? And then I'm going to call this ng model. And let's just say that this ng model is equal to my checkbox. And by default, let's just leave it as is, and say p. Let me make a paragraph tag here, and I'm just going to say that I'm going to use curly brackets here, and then I'm going to say my checkbox on, off. So let's check out what that does. Off, on, off, on, off, on. So if you remember from our class on Saturday, if I go back to here, to my code, these template tags allow me to write JavaScript in my web app. But it's like simple JavaScript, so don't expect like you can do a whole bunch of JavaScript in here. But essentially I can write JavaScript conditions. So I've got like my checkbox. So by default this is returning, anytime you use HTML inputs, if you're not familiar with them, when you check a box, you either get back a 0 or a 1. And then, of course, in JavaScript, if this input is tied to that 0 or 1, then with this model, then the model is going to return 0, 1. So 0 and 1 translate to true and false. So if true, then show on. If false, then show off. So that's essentially like a show and hide kind of pattern here. But I don't have to use any kind of jQuery. It's actually sort of built in already for me with Angular, which is really nice. So let's look at this code again. Let me save here. And I've taken out the paragraph tags this time because I want to just see it on one line. So here again, if I click the button, it's on. If I click the button, it's off.